The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. Sarah Matthews sat in the hard plastic chair, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled tissue. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across her tear-stained face. She had been here for 6 hours, waiting for news that she already knew would shatter what remained of her world. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another message from her brother asking for updates. She couldn't bring herself to look at it. How could she tell him that their mother, the woman who had raised them alone after their father abandoned them, was slipping away in a room just down the hall? How could she explain that the doctors had given them days, maybe hours, when just last week Mom had been laughing at the kitchen table, planning her 60th birthday party? A nurse emerged from room 247, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah's heart seized. "You can go in now," the nurse said softly. "She's been asking for you." Sarah stood on unsteady legs, smoothing down her wrinkled blouse with shaking hands. She had been wearing the same clothes since yesterday morning when the call came. The call that changed everything. The call that made her drop her coffee mug on the office floor and run out mid-meeting without explanation. She pushed open the door to find her mother propped up in bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets. Margaret Matthews had always been a force of nature, all 5 feet 2 inches of her. She had worked 3 jobs to keep Sarah and her brother fed after their father left. She had attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, no matter how exhausted she was. She had sacrificed everything to give them the childhood they deserved. Now she looked fragile, breakable, like a bird with clipped wings. "Mom," Sarah whispered, moving to the bedside. Margaret's eyes opened, still bright despite everything. "There's my girl," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "You look terrible, sweetheart. When's the last time you slept?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "Only you would be worried about me right now. I'm your mother. That's my job." Margaret reached out a thin hand and Sarah grasped it like a lifeline. "Where's your brother?" "David's on a flight from Seattle. He'll be here in a few hours." Margaret nodded, then winced slightly. Sarah's grip tightened. "Don't," Margaret said firmly. "Don't fall apart yet. I need you strong for what I'm about to tell you." Something in her mother's tone made Sarah straighten. This wasn't the voice of a dying woman saying goodbye. This was the voice Margaret used when she meant business. The same voice that had negotiated with landlords and bill collectors. The same voice that had stood up to Sarah's abusive high school boyfriend. "There's something I need you to do," Margaret continued. "Something important. I've kept a secret for 23 years and I can't take it to my grave." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Your father," Margaret said, and the word hung in the air like a curse. "He didn't leave us. Not the way I told you." The world tilted. Sarah gripped the bed rail to steady herself. "What do you mean he didn't leave? You said he walked out when David was 3 and I was 5. You said he chose alcohol and his freedom over us." I lied. The words were simple, but they detonated like a bomb in Sarah's chest. "I had to lie to protect you both. But now I need you to find him." "Find him?" Sarah's voice rose. "Why would I want to find the man who abandoned us? Who left you to struggle alone? Who made you work yourself to the bone while he was off doing God knows what? Because he didn't abandon you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I sent him away." The machines beeped steadily in the background, a metronome counting down the moment Sarah had left with the only parent she had ever known, the only parent she thought she had ever known. Now that foundation was cracking, revealing fault lines she had never suspected. "I don't understand," Sarah said numbly. Margaret took a shuddering breath. "Your father, Thomas, was a good man. The best man I ever knew. He loved you and David more than life itself. But he was in trouble, Sarah. Deep trouble that wasn't his fault. And I had to make a choice." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that gets people killed." Margaret's hand trembled in Sarah's grip. "He witnessed something he shouldn't have. Something involving very dangerous people. They came to our house one night when you kids were sleeping. I'll never forget the look on Tom's face when they threatened you and David. They said if he went to the police, if he testified, they would make sure we paid the price. Our babies would pay the price." Sarah felt like she was drowning. "So what happened?" "He wanted to run, to take all of us and disappear. But I knew we'd never be safe, not really. They would find us eventually. So I made him a deal." Margaret's voice broke. "I told him to go into witness protection. Alone. To testify and start a new life where these people could never find him. And in exchange, I would tell you children that he abandoned us. That he was a deadbeat who didn't want the responsibility of a family. You destroyed his memory to protect us, Sarah whispered. I destroyed my own heart to save yours, Margaret corrected. Every time you asked about your father, every time David cried for his daddy, every Father's Day and birthday and Christmas, I had to lie. I had to watch you both grow up hating a man who sacrificed everything for you, who gave up his own children to keep them safe. The tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. Does he know about you being sick? Margaret shook her head. We haven't had contact in over 2 decades. It was part of the deal. Clean break, no trails to follow. But I kept track of him as much as I could. I know where he is, or at least where he was a year ago. And Sarah, I need you to find him. I need you to tell him the truth. I need you to give him back his children before I die. Mom, I can't. I don't know how to process this. My whole life has been built on a lie. Your whole life has been built on love, Margaret said fiercely with some of her old strength. Everything I did out of love. Everything your father did, he did out of love. And now I'm asking you, out of that same love, to make things right. He deserves to know his children. You and David deserve to know your real father. What if he doesn't want to know us? The question came out small and broken. What if he's built a new life and we're just painful reminders of what he lost? Then you'll know. But Sarah, I've carried this burden for 23 years. I've kept this man's secret, protected his sacrifice, and destroyed his reputation all at once. I'm tired. I'm dying. And I need to know that when I'm gone, the truth goes with you. That my children will have their father. The door opened and a doctor entered, checking the monitors. Margaret's eyes never left Sarah's face. Promise me, Margaret said. Promise me you'll find him. Promise me you'll tell David the truth. Promise me you won't let my lies be the last word on your father. Sarah wanted to refuse. She wanted to rage against this deathbed revelation that turned everything she knew upside down. She wanted to mourn the simple story of abandonment she had lived with for so long. But looking into her mother's desperate eyes, seeing the fear and hope warring there, she found she couldn't. I promise, she whispered. I'll find him. Margaret sagged back against the pillows, relief washing over her face. There's a safety deposit box. Key is in my jewelry box at home, the one with the broken clasp. Inside you'll find everything. His new name, last known address, photos, letters he wrote to you and David that I never sent. Everything you need. Letters? Sarah's voice cracked. He wrote to us? Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every milestone I told him about through our intermediary. He never stopped being your father, Sarah. He just couldn't be it in person. Margaret's breathing was becoming labored. Read them. Share them with your brother. And then find Thomas. Find your father. The doctor moved closer, concerned. Mrs. Matthews, you need to rest. I've got eternity to rest, Margaret snapped with a flash of spirit that made Sarah's heart clench. Then softer to Sarah, send in that nurse. The one who's been kind. I need to give her instructions for the funeral. I won't have you and David worrying about that. Mom, don't. Sarah Elizabeth Matthews, I've been planning my own funeral for 6 months. I'll be damned if I go out without good music and excellent finger sandwiches. Now go. Call your brother. Tell him to hurry. And get some coffee. You look like death warmed over and only one of us gets that excuse. Sarah laughed despite everything, kissed her mother's forehead, and walked out of the room on shaking legs. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and tried to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. Her father was alive. Her father had loved them. Her entire childhood narrative was a lie constructed to save their lives. And now her mother was dying, and she had promised to find a stranger who was supposed to be the most important man in her world. She pulled out her phone and called David. Sarah? How is she? Her brother's voice was tight with anxiety. You need to get here fast, Sarah said. And David, there's something you need to know. About Dad. What about him? Is he dead? Is that why Mom's been asking about him? No. He's alive. And David, everything we thought we knew is wrong. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, I'm landing in 40 minutes. Don't say another word until I get there. Whatever this is, we face it together. Sarah closed her eyes. Together, she agreed. She ended the call and slid down the wall to sit on the cold linoleum floor. A janitor pushed a cart past her, not even glancing her way. In hospitals, breakdowns were so common they became invisible. Sarah thought about all the time she had cursed her absent father. All the time she had answered questions about him with bitter, clipped responses. All the Father's Day cards she had refused to make in elementary school while her teachers looked at her with pity. All the therapy sessions in college where she had blamed her trust issues and fear of abandonment on a man who had actually given up everything to protect her. The rage started as a simmer in her stomach and built to a roar. How dare her mother keep this from them? How dare she let them grow up hating an innocent man? How dare she make that choice without giving them any say? But then she thought about Margaret working the night shift at the diner, coming home to make breakfast before heading to her day job at the salon. She thought about the times her mother had gone without new clothes, without treats, without anything for herself to make sure Sarah and David had what they needed. She thought about the fierce protectiveness in her mother's eyes whenever anyone threatened her children. She thought about a young mother, probably terrified, being told that her children would be murdered if her husband didn't disappear. She thought about the impossible choice Margaret had faced and the burden she had carried alone for over 2 decades. The rage didn't disappear, but it shifted, redirected itself. Not at her mother, but at the circumstances that had forced such a choice. At the dangerous men who had torn a family apart. At a world where good people had to sacrifice everything just to keep their children safe. Sarah pulled herself to her feet and walked to the cafeteria. She needed coffee and she needed to think. In a few hours, David would arrive, and she would have to explain the unexplainable. Then they would go to their mother's house and open a safety deposit box that held the ghost of their father. Then they would have to decide whether to honor their mother's dying wish or leave the past buried where it had been for 23 years. The cafeteria was nearly empty, just a few exhausted residents grabbing late dinners and an elderly man drinking coffee while staring at nothing. Sarah got the largest cup available and found a corner table. She pulled out her phone and stared at the blank search bar. She could start looking now. Her mother had said Thomas was his real name. Thomas Matthews. But he would have a new name now, a new identity. Without the information in the safety deposit box, she had no way to find him. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Sarah's coffee went cold. She bought another cup. Her phone rang twice, both times friends checking in after seeing her cryptic social media post about being at the hospital. She didn't answer. Finally, 3 hours after his call, David burst through the cafeteria doors. He was still in his suit from work, tie loosened, carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. His eyes found Sarah immediately, and the look on his face broke her heart. "She's still alive," Sarah said quickly as he reached her table. "Stable for now. But David, we need to talk before you see her." David dropped into the chair across from her. At 26, he looked like their father, or at least like the few photos they had of Thomas Matthews. Tall, dark hair, strong jaw, intense green eyes. Sarah had always taken after their mother, petite with honey blonde hair and brown eyes. Looking at her brother now, she wondered what else he had inherited from the man they had never known. "Tell me," David said. So Sarah told him. Everything their mother had revealed. Every detail of the threat, the choice, the sacrifice. The lies that had protected them and destroyed a good man's reputation. The letters that existed somewhere, unread, unsent. The father who had never stopped loving them even though he could never see them. David listened without interrupting, his face going through a series of emotions. Shock, disbelief, anger, pain, and finally a grief so profound that Sarah reached across the table to grip his hand. When she finished, David was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I named my company after him. Did you know that?" Sarah shook her head. "Matthews Tech Solutions. I told myself it was using Mom's maiden name to honor her, but really, some part of me always wanted to keep his name alive. Even though I thought he was a bastard who abandoned us, I wanted that connection." David's voice was rough. "God, Sarah, I used to have dreams about him. About him showing up and begging forgiveness. And I would tell him to get lost, that we didn't need him. I was so righteous in my anger. And all along he was a hero," Sarah finished. "He saved our lives by destroying his own. We have to find him," David said suddenly, fiercely. "As soon as after we find him, we tell him the truth. We give him back what was stolen from him." "What if he doesn't want it?" Sarah voiced her fear again. "What if he's moved on? Married, has other kids, a life that doesn't include the children he gave up?" "Then we tell him thank you," David said. "We tell him that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. That we grew up safe and loved and successful because of what he did. We give him peace. But Sarah, I have to believe he wants to know us. I have to believe that somewhere out there is a man who thinks about us every day and wonders who we became." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from the nurse. "Your mother is asking for you both." They stood simultaneously and headed for the elevators. As they rode up to the 4th floor, David said quietly, "I'm glad you're here. I couldn't do this alone." "You'll never have to," Sarah promised. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Margaret was awake when they entered her room, and her face lit up at the sight of David. "There's my boy. My brilliant boy. Come here." David went to her, and Sarah watched as her tough, successful entrepreneur brother dissolved into tears in their mother's arms. Margaret held him, stroking his hair like she had when he was small, murmuring comfort. "Mom told you?" Margaret said finally, pulling back to look at David's face. He nodded. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because you were children. You needed simple answers. Bad guy left, good guy stayed, end of story. I couldn't burden you with the complexity of it." Margaret looked between her children. "I'm sorry. I know I should have told you when you were older. But every year that passed made it harder. And honestly, part of me was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd go looking for him. And what if those men were still watching? What if you led them right to him?" "Are they still a threat?" Sarah asked. "These people who threatened Dad?" Margaret shook her head. "The man who made the threats died in prison 8 years ago. The organization fell apart shortly after. I've had a private investigator keeping tabs on it all. You're safe. He's safe. It's finally over." "Then why didn't you reach out to him?" David demanded. "Why didn't you bring him home?" "Because I was a coward," Margaret said simply. "Because 23 years is a lifetime. Because I didn't know if he'd forgiven me for the choice I made. Because I was afraid." She gripped both their hands. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Death has a way of clarifying things. And I know now that you two need your father. And he needs you." They sat with her through the night, talking and crying and remembering. Margaret told them stories about Thomas they had never heard. How he had cried when Sarah was born, overwhelmed by love. How he had taught David to walk, patiently holding his hands night after night. How he had sung them both to sleep with silly made-up songs. How he had been planning to take them camping the weekend the men showed up and changed everything. She told them about the night she sent him away, how he had stood in their bedroom doorway watching them sleep for an hour, memorizing their faces. How he had begged her to find another way, any other way. How she had been the one to say no, to insist this was the only path, even as it destroyed them both. "I never stopped loving him," Margaret confessed as dawn light began to filter through the window. "I dated a few times over the years but it never felt right. How could I move on when my heart belonged to a ghost? When I sent away the only man I ever truly loved?" "Did he know?" Sarah asked. "Did he know you still loved him?" "I told him that last night. I told him that this was love. That love sometimes means letting go. That love means sacrifice." Margaret's eyes were distant, remembering. "He told me he understood. He told me he'd love me until his last breath. And then he walked out our door and never came back. The doctor came in to check vitals and adjust medications. Margaret was fading, they could all see it. Her breathing was more labored, her color worse. But she seemed at peace in a way she hadn't before. "The safety deposit box," she reminded them. "Everything you need is there. Promise me you'll go today. Promise me you'll start looking." "We promise," David said. "But Mom, we need you to fight. We need you to hang on. What if we find him? What if we can bring him here? Wouldn't you want to see him one more time?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Oh, my sweet boy. Your father and I said our goodbyes 23 years ago. This isn't about us anymore. This is about you too. This is about giving you back what was taken from you. About giving him back what was taken from him." "But don't you want to tell him yourself?" Sarah pleaded. "Don't you want him to know that you never forgot, that you never stopped loving him?" "He knows," Margaret said softly. "He's always known. And wherever I'm going, I believe I'll see him again someday. When his time comes, whenever that is, I'll be waiting. And we'll have eternity to talk about the life we didn't get to live." She squeezed their hands weakly. "But you too, you have your whole lives ahead of you. Lives that should include your father. So go. Get the box. Start your search. Do it today, while I can still hold on to the hope that you'll find him." They didn't want to leave her, but Margaret insisted. "I'll still be here when you get back. The nurses know to call you if anything changes. But I need you to do this. I need to know it started before I rest." Reluctantly, they kissed her goodbye and headed to their childhood home. The small 2-bedroom house looked exactly as it always had, well-maintained but modest. Margaret had never moved even when she could afford something better. Sarah had always thought it was because of financial practicality, but now she wondered if it was because this was the last place she had seen Thomas. The last place they had been a complete family. The key was exactly where Margaret said it would be, in the old jewelry box with the broken clasp that sat on her dresser. Sarah held the small silver key warm from her palm and looked at David. Are we really doing this? She asked. We're really doing this, he confirmed. The bank was just opening when they arrived. The safety deposit box was in Margaret's name, and with the key and Sarah's ID as the designated co-owner, they were led to a private room. The bank employee brought the box and left them alone. It was larger than Sarah expected, about the size of a shoebox. David reached for it first, then hesitated. What if we don't like what we find? He asked. What if there's something in here that changes how we see her? Or him? Then we deal with it, Sarah said. Together. David lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of envelopes, all addressed in the same handwriting. Sarah's name on some, David's on others, a few addressed to both of them. There were photographs, dozens of them, of a young couple she barely recognized. Her parents, happy and in love before everything fell apart. A birth certificate with the name Thomas James Matthews. Social Security card. Marriage license. And underneath it all, a thick folder. David opened the folder while Sarah reached for one of the envelopes with her name. The date on it was her 10th birthday. She opened it with trembling hands. The letter inside began, "My dearest Sarah girl." The handwriting was masculine, slightly messy, but clearly written with care. Sarah read. Today you turn 10 years old and I'm not there to celebrate with you. I wonder if you even remember me anymore. You were so young when I left, just 5 years old. Do you remember the stories I used to tell you? The princess who was braver than any knight? I made her up just for you because even then I could see you had a warrior's heart. I imagine you're growing up beautiful like your mother. I imagine you're smart and kind and probably too stubborn for your own good. You always did have strong opinions even as a little girl. I hope life has been good to you, sweetheart. I hope you've had friends and adventures and all the joy a childhood should hold. Your mother sends me updates when she can through our contact. She told me you won the school spelling bee last year. I was so proud I cried. I wanted to call everyone I knew and tell them, that's my daughter, the brilliant one. But of course I couldn't. Nobody here knows I have children. Nobody knows the life I left behind. I want you to know that I think about you every single day. When I wake up, you're my first thought. When I go to sleep, I pray that you're safe and happy. You're the reason I keep going even when being alone feels like too much to bear. I don't know if you'll ever read this letter. Your mother might decide it's better that you don't. But I need to write them anyway, need to tell you all the things a father should say. So here it is, Sarah, I love you. I've always loved you. I will always love you. No matter how many years pass, no matter how far apart we are, you are my daughter and I am your father and nothing can change that. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I hope your 10th year is filled with magic. All my love always, Dad. Sarah couldn't see the last lines through her tears. David was crying too, clutching a letter of his own. He wrote us every birthday, David said, voice breaking. Every single one. Sarah, I have 21 letters here. I have 18, Sarah whispered. She had only recently turned 28. He never missed one. They read in silence for a while, passing letters back and forth, piecing together a father's love from across an impossible distance. He wrote about his new life in careful, vague terms, never giving details that could identify him or his location. But he wrote about missing them, about wondering who they were becoming, about the pride he felt in their accomplishments. Margaret had clearly kept him updated through the years, sharing report cards and achievements and milestones. When Sarah turned 16, he wrote about hoping she wasn't dating yet, then laughing at himself for being the stereotypical overprotective father from afar. When David graduated high school, Thomas wrote about wishing he could have been there, about imagining the young man he had become. The most recent letters were harder to read. As the years passed, a note of resignation crept in. Thomas spoke less of someday and more of never. He wrote about accepting that they would never know him, that he would die a stranger to his own children. But he never stopped writing, never stopped loving them, never stopped being their father even in absence. The folder, Sarah said finally, setting down the letters. What's in it? David had been looking through it while she read. His new identity. Robert James Thompson, living in Asheville, North Carolina. There's a private investigator's report from last year. He's a carpenter, owns his own small business. Never married. Lives alone. David looked up, eyes red. He's been alone all this time, Sarah. For 23 years he's been completely alone. The grief of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. While they had been growing up with friends and activities and eventually relationships, their father had been in exile, serving a sentence for the crime of protecting his family. Living a half-life, using a name that wasn't his, cut off from everyone he loved. We have to find him now, Sarah said urgently. Today. We can't let another day go by with him thinking we hate him. David was already pulling out his phone. The report has an address. It's a 13-hour drive or we can catch a flight. There's one leaving in 3 hours if we hurry. We should go back to the hospital first. Tell Mom we're going. Get her blessing. They gathered all the letters and photos carefully, reverently. These were pieces of their father's heart, preserved in paper. Sarah held the folder with his new identity like it was made of gold. After all these years, they finally knew where to find him. The drive back to the hospital seemed to take forever and no time at all. Sarah's mind was racing with questions. What would she say to him? How do you approach a father you've never known? Would he even want to see them, or would their presence just bring back painful memories? Margaret was sleeping when they arrived, but she woke as they entered. Her face was drawn with pain, but she managed to smile. You found it, she said, seeing the folder in Sarah's hands. We found it, Sarah confirmed. Mom, we're going to him. We're flying to North Carolina today. Something like relief and sorrow mixed in Margaret's expression. Good. That's good. Tell him. Tell him I'm sorry it took so long. Tell him I loved him every day. Tell him I'm proud of the man he became even from afar. You could tell him yourself, David said desperately. If we can reach him, we could get him on a plane. He could be here tomorrow. But Margaret was already shaking her head. No, baby. This isn't about me and him. Our story ended a long time ago. This is about you and your father. About the future, not the past. Her breathing was labored. Besides, I don't think I have tomorrow. I can feel it, David. I'm holding on by a thread and that thread is getting thinner. Don't say that, Sarah begged. Fight, Mom. Please fight. I've been fighting for 23 years, sweetheart. I'm tired. Margaret reached for both their hands. Listen to me. When you find your father, and you will find him, I need you to tell him something for me. Tell him that what we did was worth it. That our sacrifice gave you both beautiful lives. That I would make the same choice again even knowing the cost. Mom? Tell him that love isn't always about being together. Sometimes it's about letting go. Sometimes it's about protecting what matters most, even when it destroys you. Tears were running down Margaret's face. Tell him that he was the love of my life and that I'll be waiting for him, however long it takes. Tell him I never stopped wearing my wedding ring. She held up her left hand, and for the first time, Sarah noticed the thin gold band she had never really paid attention to before. Tell him thank you for giving me you too. For being brave enough to walk away. For being the man I knew he was. The machine started beeping more urgently. Nurses rushed in. Sarah and David were pushed back as the medical team surrounded their mother. We have to go, David said, pulling Sarah toward the door. We have to catch that flight. It's what she wants. I can't leave her, Sarah sobbed. What if she dies while we're gone? Then she dies knowing we're on our way to Dad, David said, his own voice breaking. She's giving us permission to go, Sarah. She's telling us this is what she needs. The doctor was calling orders. Margaret's eyes found theirs across the chaos. Go, she mouthed. Find him. So they went. They ran. They caught the flight by minutes, breathless and heartbroken. As the plane took off, Sarah looked out the window at the city falling away below and prayed that their mother would hold on just a little longer. Prayed that somewhere in North Carolina, a man named Robert Thompson, who was really Thomas Matthews, would be willing to meet the children he gave up half a lifetime ago. David had found Robert's business online. Thompson Carpentry had a simple website with a phone number and address. The photos showed custom furniture and home renovations, all done with obvious skill and care. There was a headshot of the owner, a man in his 50s with green eyes and salt and pepper hair. Sarah stared at the photo for the entire flight. This was her father. This stranger with the kind eyes and careful smile. This was the man who had written her letters for 23 years. This was the hero their mother had described. This was the parent they had never known. When they landed in Asheville, they rented a car. The address from the private investigator's report led them to a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Modest homes with well-kept yards. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors and watched out for each other. Robert's house was at the end of a quiet street, a small craftsman-style home with a neat front porch. There was a truck in the driveway with Thompson Carpentry painted on the side. A wind chime hung from the porch ceiling, singing softly in the breeze. Sarah and David sat in the rental car, neither moving. What do we say? Sarah asked. How do we even start this conversation? I don't know, David admitted. But we've come this far. We can't turn back now. They got out of the car on shaking legs. Walked up the path to the front door. Sarah raised her hand to knock, then paused. Wait, she said. What if he's not alone? What if he has someone over? We can't just blurt out who we are in front of strangers. Sarah, we're overthinking this. Just knock. Sarah knocked. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. The man from the photo stood there, wearing jeans and a work shirt with sawdust on the shoulders. He looked at them with polite confusion, the expression of someone confronted with unexpected strangers. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was deeper than Sarah expected, warm and rough at the edges. This was it. The moment that would change everything. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? How do you tell someone that you're the child they gave up? That you know the truth now? That you're sorry for ever thinking badly of them? David, always more practical, stepped forward. "Are you Robert Thompson?" "I am," the man said slowly, eyes moving between them with growing wariness. "Look, if you're selling something." "We're not selling anything," Sarah managed to say. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk to you. It's important. It's about Thomas Matthews." The man went absolutely still. The color drained from his face. His hand gripped the doorframe like he needed it to stay upright. "How do you know that name?" he whispered. "Because that's who you really are," David said gently. "And we're David and Sarah Matthews. We're your children." For a long moment, Robert, Thomas, their father, just stared at them. Sarah watched emotions chase across his face. Shock, disbelief, fear, hope, joy, all flickering past too fast to name. Then his knees buckled and he gripped the doorframe harder, breathing hard. "That's not possible," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "You can't be. Margaret would never. She wouldn't bring you here. It's not safe." "It is safe," Sarah said urgently. "The man who threatened us died 8 years ago. His organization fell apart. Mom's been tracking it. You're safe. We're safe. It's over. Mom sent us," David added. "She wanted us to find you. She wanted us to know the truth." Thomas was shaking his head, still gripping the doorframe. No, she wouldn't. We had an agreement. I gave you up to keep you safe. You're supposed to hate me. You're supposed to think I'm a deadbeat who abandoned you. You're not supposed to be here." "But we are here," Sarah said, and suddenly she was crying. "And we don't hate you. We know what you did. We know you gave up everything to protect us. And we're so sorry. We're so sorry for all the years you spent alone. We're so sorry we didn't know sooner." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw recognition dawning in his eyes. "You have your mother's face," he whispered. "But those are my mother's eyes. My God, you're all grown up." "I'm 28, Sarah said. "And David's 26. We're grown up and we're here and we want to know you. If you'll let us." "And you," Thomas said, looking at David. "You look just like I did at your age. Margaret sent me photos over the years, but seeing you in person." His voice broke. "I can't believe you're real. I can't believe you're here." "We're here," David confirmed. "And we're not going anywhere unless you tell us to." "Tell you to go?" Thomas laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. "I've dreamed of this for 23 years. Every night I go to sleep imagining what it would be like if you knocked on my door. If by some miracle you found me. If somehow you knew the truth." He wiped at his eyes roughly. "But it was just a dream. It was never supposed to actually happen." "Can we come in?" Sarah asked. "There's so much we need to tell you. So much we need to say." Thomas stepped back, opening the door wider. His hand was trembling. "Of course. Please. God, I'm sorry, I'm not being a very good host. I can't quite process that you're standing in front of me." They stepped into a home that was sparse but comfortable. Handmade furniture filled the living room, each piece clearly crafted with skill and love. Photos lined the walls, but not of family. Landscapes mostly and nature scenes. "I never remarried," Thomas said, following Sarah's gaze. "Never even dated seriously. It felt wrong, like I was already married. Like I already had a family even if I couldn't be with them." He gestured to the couch. "Please sit. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee?" God, I have no idea what your favorite drinks are. I don't know anything about you." "We brought the letters," Sarah said, pulling the stack from her bag. "The ones you wrote us. We read them all on the plane. Every single one." Thomas sank into a chair like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "Margaret kept them?" I assumed she destroyed them. To protect you. To maintain the story." "She kept everything," David said. "Every letter, every photo, every piece of information about who you really were. She kept it all in a safety deposit box, waiting for the right time to tell us." "Why now?" Thomas asked. "Why after all these years?" Sarah's throat closed up. David reached over and gripped her hand. Because she's dying, David said quietly. She has maybe days left. And she didn't want to die without making things right. Without giving us back our father. The grief that washed over Thomas's face was devastating to witness. No, he breathed. Not Margaret. Not yet. We're supposed to have more time. I always thought we'd have more time. She wanted us to tell you something, Sarah said through her tears. She said what you both did was worth it. That your sacrifice gave us beautiful lives. That she would make the same choice again. She never stopped loving you, David added. She said you were the love of her life. She never took off her wedding ring. Thomas buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with sobs that seemed to come from the very core of him. Sarah and David sat helpless, watching their father, this stranger who was family, break apart from grief. Finally he looked up, eyes red and face wet. I need to see her, he said. If there's time, if it's possible, I need to see her one more time. I need to tell her. God, I need to tell her so many things. We can try, Sarah said. But Thomas, we left her at the hospital in bad shape. I don't know if she'll still be. She couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas stood abruptly. Then we need to go now. How far is the airport? Can we catch a flight tonight? David was already on his phone. There's a red-eye in 3 hours. I'm booking it now. 3 tickets too. He paused, looking at his phone screen. I have 17 missed calls from the hospital. The world stopped. Sarah grabbed her phone. 22 missed calls. She had put it on silent during the flight and never turned the sound back on. With shaking hands she called the hospital back. The phone rang twice before a nurse answered. Miss Matthews? I'm so glad you called back. It's about your mother. Is she? Sarah couldn't make herself ask. She's still with us but barely. She's been asking for you both. How soon can you get here? We're in North Carolina, Sarah said. We're booking a flight now. We'll be there as fast as we can. Please tell her to hold on. Tell her we're coming and we're bringing someone with us. Someone she needs to see. There was a pause. I'll tell her. But Miss Matthews, you need to hurry. They rushed to the airport. Thomas grabbed nothing but his wallet and keys, leaving his house unlocked in his haste. The flight felt endless. They sat together, 3 people bound by blood and tragedy and hope, not speaking much. What was there to say that could encompass everything they were feeling? Thomas kept looking at Sarah and David like he was afraid they would disappear if he looked away. Sarah caught him staring at one point and managed a watery smile. We're real, she said. We're really here. I know, Thomas said. But I've imagined this so many times that part of me thinks I'm dreaming. That I'll wake up alone again and you'll be gone. Tell us about the letters, David said. How did you know what to write? How did you know about our lives? Margaret and I had an intermediary, Thomas explained. A lawyer who handled the witness protection arrangements. Once a year she would send updates through him. Photos, sometimes report cards, news. I lived for those updates. They were all I had of you. He smiled sadly. When Sarah won the spelling bee, I celebrated alone in my apartment with a beer and tears. When David graduated top of his class, I framed the photo Margaret sent and kept it by my bed. We have so much to catch up on, Sarah said. So many years to account for. We have time, Thomas said. Now that I've found you, we have all the time in the world. But even as he said it, they all knew it wasn't quite true. Time was running out for Margaret. The plane couldn't fly fast enough. They landed just before dawn and raced to the hospital. Thomas was quiet in the car, his face pale and set. Sarah wondered what he was feeling, knowing he was about to see the woman he had loved and lost all those years ago. The woman he had never stopped loving. The woman who was dying. The hospital corridors were quiet at this early hour. A few night shift nurses nodded at them as they passed. When they reached Margaret's floor, the nurse from the phone was waiting. She's been drifting in and out, the nurse said gently. But she's coherent when she's awake. She's been asking for you constantly. All 3 of us need to go in, Sarah said. Please. The nurse looked at Thomas questioningly. He said nothing, just stared at the door to room 247 like it held all the answers to every question he had ever asked. It's important, David added. Please. The nurse nodded and opened the door. Margaret lay in the bed, looking impossibly small and frail. The machines beeped steadily, but her breathing was labored and shallow. Her eyes were closed. Mom, Sarah said softly, moving to the bedside. We're here. We're back. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. She smiled weakly at Sarah, then at David. You found him? We found him, David confirmed. And Mom, we brought him with us. Margaret's eyes went wide. What? No, I didn't mean. I thought you'd meet him and talk and… Thomas stepped into view. The sound Margaret made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tom? Is that really you? Hello, Maggie, Thomas said, his voice breaking on her name. He moved to the other side of the bed and Sarah and David stepped back to give them space. It's been a long time. 23 years, 4 months and 12 days, Margaret whispered. But who's counting? Thomas laughed, crying at the same time. You look like I'm dying? Margaret supplied with a flash of her old spirit. Because I am. But Tom, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe they brought you. They told me everything, Thomas said, taking her hand carefully, like she was made of glass. About the threats, about your choice, about the burden you've carried all these years. Maggie, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you had to make that decision alone. I'm sorry you had to lie to our babies to protect them. I'd do it again, Margaret said fiercely. I'd do it 1,000 times to keep them safe. To keep you safe. I know you would. You were always the brave one. Thomas brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. You need to know that. I never stopped loving you either, Margaret said. I've been waiting, Tom. All these years I've been waiting to see you again. I just didn't think it would be like this. Like what? With me leaving you again. This time for good. Don't say that, Thomas begged. Don't leave me again. I just got you back. You didn't get me back, sweetheart. You got our children back. That's so much better. Margaret looked past him to where Sarah and David stood, holding each other and crying. Look at them, Tom. Look at the beautiful, strong, incredible people they became. We did that. Our sacrifice made that possible. They're perfect, Thomas agreed, looking at them with such love it made Sarah's heart ache. They're absolutely perfect. Take care of them, Margaret said. Love them. Get to know them. Be the father you always wanted to be. You have time now, time I never got to give you before. Don't waste it. I won't, Thomas promised. But Maggie, I need you to fight. I need you to hang on. We could have time too. We could. No, Margaret said gently. Our time was 23 years ago. This is their time now. Let us go, Tom. Let us rest. We've both been carrying this weight for so long. Isn't it time to put it down? I don't know how to let you go again, Thomas said brokenly. The same way you did before, Margaret said. With love. With grace. With the knowledge that you're doing what's right, even though it hurts like hell. She was fading, they could all see it. Her breathing was getting weaker, her voice softer. Tell me you forgive me. For sending you away. For keeping you from them. Tell me you forgive me. There's nothing to forgive, Thomas said. You saved all of us. You're a hero, Maggie. My hero. Margaret smiled. I love you, Thomas Matthews. I've loved you since I was 17 years old and you asked me to dance at Jenny Morrison's party. I've loved you through everything. I'll love you in whatever comes next. I love you too, Thomas said. I'll see you again someday. And Maggie? When I do, I'm asking you for that dance you owe me. The one we never got at our 25th anniversary. It's a date, Margaret whispered. She looked to her children then. Come here, my babies. Sarah and David moved to the bed. Margaret reached for their hands, so weak now she could barely lift her arms. Be good to each other, she said. Be good to your father. Make up for lost time. And don't mourn me too long. I lived a full life. I loved hard. I fought for what mattered. That's all anyone can ask for. We love you, Mom, Sarah sobbed. We'll make you proud, David added. You already have, Margaret said. Her eyes were closing. Tom, are you still there? I'm here, Thomas said, gripping her hand. Good, Margaret sighed. That's good. I don't want to do this alone. You're not alone, Thomas promised. I'm right here. I won't leave you. Margaret's breathing slowed. The machine started making different sounds. Nurses appeared in the doorway but didn't enter, giving them this final moment of privacy. I see you, Margaret whispered so softly they almost couldn't hear. In the light. You're young again. We're both young. Oh, Tom, we're dancing. And then she was gone. The machines flatlined. The nurses came in. But Thomas didn't let go of her hand, not even as the doctor came to officially pronounce the time of death. He stood there, this man who had lost everything twice now, holding the hand of his first and only love, and cried like the world was ending. Sarah and David held each other, watching their parents, together for the first time in their memory and the last time in their mother's life. There was something achingly beautiful about it even through the grief. Margaret had died with her family around her. She had died knowing her children knew the truth. She had died with forgiveness and love and the man she had never stopped loving. It wasn't the ending any of them would have chosen. But it was the ending Margaret had wanted. Eventually Thomas let go. Eventually they had to leave the room. Eventually the mechanics of death took over, paperwork and phone calls and funeral arrangements. But not before Thomas leaned down and kissed Margaret's forehead one last time. "Thank you," he whispered to her. "For everything. For our children. For your strength. For your love. I'll see you again, Maggie. Save me that dance." They left the hospital as the sun was rising. 3 people irrevocably changed. Sarah and David had come to find a father and lost their mother. Thomas had found his children and said goodbye to his wife. But they had each other now. And that was what Margaret had wanted. That was her final gift. The funeral was 3 days later. Sarah and David handled the arrangements, following the detailed instructions Margaret had left. Excellent music and excellent finger sandwiches, just as she had specified. The turnout was huge. Margaret had touched so many lives in her 60 years, had been a friend and confidant and mother figure to so many. Thomas stood between his children at the service, looking lost and found at the same time. People kept asking who he was and each time Sarah would say, "This is our father." And each time Thomas would look at her with such gratitude and wonder that it broke her heart a little more. At the reception, an older woman approached Thomas tentatively. "I'm sorry but you look so familiar. Have we met before?" Thomas shook his head. "I don't think so. I'm from out of town." "That's funny," the woman said. "You look just like Margaret's husband. She showed me a picture once years ago. Said he had passed away. But you could be his twin." Sarah started to intervene, but Thomas put a hand on her arm. "Maybe I just have one of those faces," he said gently. "But thank you for being a friend to Margaret. She clearly had wonderful people in her life." When the woman left, David said quietly, "You could tell people the truth now. It's safe. They're gone. The threats are over." Thomas shook his head. "Robert Thompson has a life, a business, friends. Thomas Matthews is your father, but he's also legally dead. I think it's best to keep it that way. Some secrets are better left buried." "But don't you want people to know?" Sarah asked. "Don't you want recognition for what you sacrificed?" "I don't need recognition," Thomas said. "I have you too. That's all I ever wanted. The rest is just noise." In the days that followed, they began the slow work of getting to know each other. Thomas extended his stay indefinitely, letting his assistant handle the business back in Asheville. He rented an apartment near Sarah's place, and they fell into a tentative routine. Coffee in the mornings, where Sarah learned her father liked his black with 2 sugars, exactly like she did. Dinners where David would regale him with stories from work, and Thomas would listen with rapt attention, asking questions and offering advice drawn from his own business experience. Long walks where they would talk about everything and nothing, filling in the gaps of 23 lost years. Thomas told them about his life in witness protection. The loneliness, yes, but also the small joys he had found. The satisfaction of working with his hands, of creating beautiful things from raw wood. The friends he had made, even if they didn't know his real name. The quiet pleasure of a life well lived, even if it was a life in exile. Sarah told him about her career in marketing, her apartment she was proud of, her failed relationship with a man who couldn't understand why she had such trust issues. Now she understood where those issues came from, the legacy of abandonment that hadn't been abandonment at all. David shared his journey building his company from the ground up, the challenges and triumphs, the way he had driven himself to success partly to prove something to the father he thought had left them. "I wanted you to regret leaving," he admitted. "I wanted you to see what you'd missed and feel terrible about it. And now I know you already did feel terrible. You felt it every day. I'm so proud of you both," Thomas said, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "Everything you've accomplished, everything you've become. You did it without me and that kills me, but it also amazes me. You're both so strong. So capable." "We had a good teacher," Sarah said. "Mom made sure we knew how to stand on our own." "She was extraordinary," Thomas agreed. "I knew it the day I met her. This fierce, brilliant woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. I knew I'd love her forever. I just didn't know forever would look like this." They sorted through Margaret's belongings together, and Thomas would occasionally pick up an object and tell a story they had never heard. This coffee mug was from their honeymoon. This scarf he had bought her for their first anniversary. This book was one she had read to them as children, and he had read it too when they were babies, making up silly voices that made them giggle. Every object was a connection, a thread tying their mother's past to their present, weaving Thomas back into the fabric of their family. But it wasn't all healing and reconciliation. There were hard moments too. Times when the grief would hit Sarah out of nowhere and she would rail at Thomas for the years they had lost, even though she knew it wasn't his fault. Times when David would withdraw, overwhelmed by the complexity of gaining a father while losing a mother. Times when Thomas would look at them with such sadness that they knew he was thinking about all the moments he had missed. First steps, first words, first days of school, graduations, heartbreaks, triumphs. "I'm sorry," Thomas said one night after a particularly difficult conversation where Sarah had broken down crying about how unfair it all was. "I'm sorry that finding me came at the cost of losing her. I'm sorry you have to grieve and adjust at the same time. I'm sorry for all of it." "It's not your fault," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But emotionally? Sometimes I'm just so angry at the universe for giving us this impossible situation. For making us choose between knowing you and having more time with her." "We didn't choose," David pointed out. "She chose. She chose to tell us when she did. And maybe that was the right choice. Maybe if she had told us years ago, we would have been too angry to really hear it. Too bitter about the deception to appreciate the love behind it." "She was wise like that," Thomas said. "Always thinking 3 steps ahead. Always protecting you even when it cost her." They were sitting in Margaret's house, which now legally belonged to Sarah and David. They hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Selling felt like betrayal, but keeping it felt like living in a shrine. For now they just gathered there, the 3 of them, surrounded by memories and trying to figure out what came next. "Can I ask you something?" David said suddenly. "When you walked away that night, when you left us sleeping, what were you thinking?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I was thinking that I was the luckiest and unluckiest man alive. Lucky to have had 5 years with you, unlucky that it couldn't be longer. I was thinking that I would rather die than let anything happen to you. I was thinking that your mother was the bravest person I had ever known for making the hard choice that I couldn't make." He looked at his hands. "And I was thinking that I would spend the rest of my life missing you. That every birthday, every holiday, every milestone would be a knife to the heart. But that the pain was worth it if it meant you were safe." "Were you ever tempted to break the agreement?" Sarah asked. "To reach out to try to see us?" "Every single day," Thomas admitted. "Especially in the early years. I would drive by the house sometimes just to see the lights on and know you were there. I never went in, never let myself be seen, but I needed to know you were okay. Margaret caught me once. She came out to the street and told me I had to stop, that it was too dangerous. We sat in my car for an hour just talking. It was the only time we saw each other in all these years until the hospital." "You still loved her," Sarah said. "It wasn't a question." "I never stopped," Thomas confirmed. "How could I? She gave me everything. A family, a purpose, a reason to keep going even when going was hard. She was my person, the one I was supposed to grow old with. And instead, I grew old alone while she raised our children and built a life without me. But she did it brilliantly. Look at you two. You're everything parents could hope for." "We had our struggles," David said. "It wasn't all perfect. Sarah went through a really dark period in high school." "The cutting," Sarah said bluntly, rolling up her sleeve to show the faint scars on her forearm. "I was so angry and I didn't know why. Now I understand. I was grieving a father I didn't remember but felt the absence of anyway." Thomas reached out, gently touching the scars. "I'm sorry you hurt like that. I'm sorry I wasn't there to help." "You're here now," Sarah said. "That has to count for something." And it did. Slowly, painfully, beautifully they built a relationship. Thomas started video calling them daily from Asheville when he finally went back to his business. He came to visit every month, staying for long weekends where they would cook together and watch movies and talk until late into the night. Sarah introduced him to her friends as her father, and the pride in her voice when she said it made Thomas's eyes shine with unshed tears. David brought him to his office, showed him around, introduced him to his team. "This is my dad," he would say, and Thomas would shake hands and smile and feel like maybe finally he had earned the title. 6 months after Margaret's death, they held a small private ceremony at her grave. Thomas brought flowers, yellow roses that had been her favorite. They stood together, the 3 of them, and Thomas spoke. "Thank you, Maggie," he said to the headstone. "Thank you for our children. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for keeping them safe when I couldn't. Thank you for being strong enough for all of us." His voice broke. "I miss you every day. I love you still. I'll love you always. And I promise I'll take care of them. I promise I'll be the father they deserve. I promise your sacrifice won't be in vain." Sarah laid flowers, 2 white lilies. "I forgive you, Mom," she said. "For the lies, for the secrets, for keeping Dad from us. I understand now why you did it. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful you loved us enough to make the hard choice. I'm grateful you gave us Dad back before you left. I'm grateful for everything." David placed a single red rose. "You were right," he told the grave. "You said Dad was a good man, a hero. You were right about that. You were right about a lot of things. I just wish I had known sooner. I wish I could have told you I understood while you were still here to hear it." They stood in silence for a while, 3 people connected by blood and loss and love, saying goodbye and hello at the same time. Goodbye to Margaret, to the life they had known. Hello to each other, to the family they were becoming. Life went on as it always does. Sarah started dating again, and this time when a relationship got serious, she introduced her boyfriend to her father. Thomas grilled him good-naturedly, asking about intentions and careers and whether he knew how lucky he was. Sarah rolled her eyes but was secretly pleased. This was what having a father felt like. This protective, loving presence she had missed all her life. David got engaged and he asked Thomas to be his best man. Thomas cried when David asked, overwhelmed by the honor. "I know I wasn't there for most of your life," David said. "But you're here now. And I want you standing beside me when I start my own family." The wedding was beautiful. Thomas walked down the aisle with Sarah, both of them in the wedding party. When the officiant asked who gave the bride away, traditionally David's mother would have been mentioned. But David had requested a change to the ceremony. "Her mother, who is with us in spirit, and her father, who is with us in presence, give their blessing," the officiant said. Thomas squeezed Sarah's arm and she squeezed back. Margaret would have loved this, she thought. Would have been so proud. At the reception, during the father-daughter dance, Thomas danced with Sarah to a song she had chosen. As they swayed across the floor, he said quietly, "I imagine this is what it would have been like if I had been there all along. School dances and proms and eventually your wedding. I would have danced with you then too." "You will dance with me at my wedding," Sarah said. "When that day comes. Because you'll be there, Dad. You'll walk me down the aisle." "I'd like that," Thomas said, voice thick with emotion. "I'd like that very much." The years passed. Thomas became a fixture in their lives, no longer the stranger father but just Dad. He taught Sarah woodworking and they built a bookshelf together for her apartment. He mentored David in business, drawing on his own experience running Thompson Carpentry. He became Uncle Tom to David's children when they came along, spoiling his grandchildren with handmade toys and infinite patience. On the 5th anniversary of Margaret's death, they gathered at her grave again. This time Thomas brought a photo. It was one from the safety deposit box showing young Thomas and Margaret on their wedding day, radiant with hope and love. "I thought she should have this," Thomas said, placing it in a weatherproof frame at the base of the headstone. "A reminder of what we were. What we could have been. What we were in the end, I suppose, even if only for a moment." "Do you have regrets?" Sarah asked. "About how it all turned out?" Thomas considered the question. "I regret the time we lost. I regret the pain we all endured. I regret that Margaret and I didn't get our happy ending." He looked at his children, at the grandchildren playing nearby. "But I don't regret the choice we made. Because look at what it gave us. You two are alive and thriving. You have families and careers and happiness. That was the point of it all. That was what we sacrificed for." "Was it worth it?" David asked. "Honestly, was it worth 23 years alone?" "You're asking a man to measure the value of his children's lives," Thomas said gently. "There's no calculation that makes sense. Would I have preferred a life where the threat never existed and we could have all been together? Of course. But that wasn't an option. So yes, it was worth it. You were always worth it." Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from her boyfriend, now fiancé, asking what time she'd be home. She smiled and typed back a response. "Mom would be happy," she said, "to see us all together like this. To know we found our way back to each other." "She is happy," Thomas said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows. And she's at peace. We gave her that in the end. Peace." They stood together in the quiet cemetery, a family forged by sacrifice and reunited by love. The story that had begun with a terrible choice had found its way to redemption. Not the ending anyone would have written, but perhaps the ending they were always meant to have. Because love, real love, isn't about being together every moment. Sometimes it's about making the hard choices. Sometimes it's about sacrifice. Sometimes it's about letting go so that others can live. Margaret and Thomas had understood that. They had lived it. And now their children understood it too. As they walked back to their cars, Thomas's grandchildren running ahead, Sarah slipped her hand into her father's. "I love you, Dad," she said. Thomas squeezed her hand, smiling through the tears that always came when she called him that. "I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. I always will." And in that moment, standing between past and future, grief and joy, loss and finding, they were complete. A family broken apart and brought back together. A father who never stopped being a father. Children who finally knew the truth. The last promise had been kept. Margaret could rest. And they could live. The story didn't end there, of course. Life never really ends, it just continues, weaving new chapters, creating new memories. But that's the thing about love and family. The story never truly ends. It just changes form, evolves, grows. Thomas lived to see Sarah get married, walking her down the aisle just as he had promised. He lived to see more grandchildren born, holding each one with the reverence of a man who understood what it meant to miss such moments. He lived long enough to tell his story to those grandchildren, to explain why Grandma Margaret's picture sat beside his bed, why he still wore his wedding ring after all these years. And when Thomas's time finally came, many years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his last words were simple. "Tell Maggie I'm coming," he whispered. "Tell her I'm ready for that dance." Sarah, now silver-haired herself, held her father's hand as he slipped away. "She knows, Dad," she said through her tears. "She's been waiting." And in the end, that was the real story. Not one of loss, though there was plenty of that. Not one of regret, though that existed too. But a story of love that transcended time and distance and impossible circumstances. Love that made people brave enough to sacrifice everything. Love that waited decades for reunion. Love that, in the end, conquered even death itself. Because somewhere, in whatever comes after, Margaret and Thomas were finally together again. Young again. Dancing again. Free from the weight of the choices they had made and the years they had lost. And their children, looking at the photo from the wedding day placed in Thomas's casket, smiled through their tears. Because they understood now, finally, completely, what their parents had given them. Not just life, though that was the first gift. But also the knowledge that love is worth fighting for. That family is worth protecting. That sacrifice, real sacrifice, is the highest form of devotion. They had learned it from two people who loved them enough to let go. And they would carry that lesson forward, telling the story to their own children and grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of a love that changed everything. The story of Margaret and Thomas. The story of impossible choices and unbreakable bonds. The story of the last promise kept in the end. The end.